1866 Utah, the evil slave who served her master's family, until her cruelty brought her freedom. Under the bleak sun of Utah in 1866, silence ruled over the desolate valley where the Whitmore estate stood. The house, a crumbling relic of wealth and cruelty, seemed to breathe with its own haunted rhythm, the sound of chains beneath the floorboards, of whispers that refused to die. They said the walls had memory, that every scream ever uttered in that place still lingered in the dust. And among those memories lived one name that terrified even the descendants of the Whitmore bloodline. Evelyn. The slave who served her master's family and whose cruelty became the key to her freedom. No one dared speak of her in daylight. Her story was passed in murmurs, half curse, half warning, as if uttering her name too clearly might awaken something best left buried. Evelyn was not born evil, they said. She was made, forged in the fire of humiliation, betrayal, and unspeakable torment. She learned obedience first, silence second, and vengeance last. But when the night came, the night that changed everything, silence was the first thing to die. Those who reread the hidden pages of Utah's post-Civil War records claim her tale was erased from official archives. Why? Because what she did shattered the fragile illusion of order that white families clung to after emancipation. Her master's family, the Whitmores, built their fortune on deceit and blood, hiding their sins beneath the banners of progress and faith. Yet one of their own, the quiet servant with eyes like burning coals, would become the executioner of their legacy. But before you decide who the villain truly was, I'll ask you to stay until the very end. Because buried beneath this tale of cruelty and vengeance lies an unpublished confession. A letter discovered in 1904 that exposes a horrifying twist no historian ever dared discuss publicly. And that letter, which I'll reveal at the end of this story, may change everything you think you know about Evelyn and her so-called evil. Imagine the Utah desert that year, raw, barren, drenched in dust and superstition. It was a place where secrets didn't vanish. They just sank deeper into the earth. People spoke of curses that roamed at night, of lights flickering from abandoned shacks, of slaves who never truly left their chains behind. And in the Whitmore property, under the constant hum of the wind, there were cries no one could explain. The family claimed it was the sound of old timber expanding. The locals whispered otherwise. They said it was Evelyn, still waiting for someone to remember. The records describe her as 22 years old, tall, thin, with scars that wrapped around her wrists like bracelets. Her master's wife trusted her, at least at first. Evelyn was the one who bathed their children, cleaned their silver, and prepared the evening prayers. Yet beneath her calm obedience, something restless stirred, a hatred so silent it almost felt holy. Each day she smiled, and each night she counted. Not coins, but sins. Every cruel word, every lash, every humiliation. She remembered them all. And one day she vowed the tally would be paid. They say the storm began on a Thursday evening. The candles flickered for no reason. The livestock screamed in their pens, and the family dog refused to go near the servant quarters. By morning, the youngest Whitmore boy had vanished. Only one clue remained, a small wooden toy horse found half buried near the well, a well Evelyn had been forbidden to approach. The master accused her, of course. He locked her in the cellar, denying food and light for 3 days. But when he finally opened the door, Evelyn was gone. Only her chains remained, neatly coiled, like a serpent resting after the kill. And that was only the beginning. Before we descend into the horrors of that night, before we open the locked doors and uncover what truly happened beneath the Whitmore home, you should know something. This story is not just about revenge. It's about truth buried beneath history's lies. about how power corrupts the soul and how pain, when left to rot, becomes its own form of justice. Stay with me until the end of this story, because what was found decades later, in a sealed chest beneath that same property, reveals not only Evelyn S.'s fate, but the reason her spirit never left that valley. Inside that chest was something that historians refuse to classify, something too disturbing for museums or sermons. And yes, you will see exactly what it was, but only if you dare to listen till the very end, because once you hear what Evelyn left behind, you'll understand why her story was never meant to be told, and why those who tried to bury her name have never slept peacefully since. If dark, forgotten histories, forbidden truths, and the echoes of vengeance buried in time fascinate you, then prepare yourself. What began as one woman's suffering ended as a haunting that no church could silence, and believe me, no one was prepared for what they discovered. Utah, 1866, a land still trembling from the aftermath of the Civil War. The dust of defeat had not yet settled across America, and though the chains of slavery had been declared broken, the air still reeked of ownership and fear. The Whitmore estate sat like a festering wound in the red earth, its fences stretched wide, its barns filled with stolen labor, and its chapel ringing with prayers that no god seemed to hear. Here, faith and cruelty walked hand in hand. Every hymn sung on Sunday masked the sound of screams swallowed by the walls. The region itself was changing. Railroads cut through the wilderness, bringing whispers of progress. But progress for whom? Former slaves, now called servants, were given new titles, not freedom. The Whitmores were masters of illusion. Their estate was known for its hospitality, their church donations, their so-called Christian charity. But the truth lived in the soil, in the stains that no rain could wash away. Locals claimed that even after the war, the Whitmores kept their own hidden order, a household code that demanded silence, obedience, and repentance. Anyone who broke it vanished into the ground, as if the desert itself swallowed sinners whole. The main house stood 3 stories tall, whitewashed but cracked like the conscience of its owner. Inside, portraits of ancestors stared down with judgmental eyes, and the faint smell of vinegar and blood seemed eternal. The servant quarters were hidden behind the orchard, small wooden cabins with no windows and padlocks on the outside. At night, lanterns flickered in the distance, too far to be from the main house, too close to belong to anyone else. The wind carried voices, prayers, sobs, and sometimes laughter that did not sound human. The Whitmore patriarch, Thomas Whitmore, was a man of sermons and scars. He preached righteousness in public and practiced torment in private. He believed pain was a form of purification, that suffering made the soul obedient. His wife, Margaret Waugh, upheld the illusion of civility, hosting Sunday teas and writing letters to newspapers about the noble duty of restoration. Together, they raised 3 children, though only 2 were ever seen after the summer of 1866. And then there was Evelyn. The records describe her as property acquired before the war's end, though no bill of sale was ever found. She appeared one spring morning, escorted by a trader whose name was later struck from all documents. Some said she had come from the Carolinas. Others whispered she had escaped a burning plantation and was taken in under false pretenses. Whatever the truth, she became indispensable, not just to the household, but to its very order. Margaret trusted her with the kitchen, the children, even the family Bible. Thomas called her the Obedient One, a title that carried both praise and threat. But beneath that quiet obedience, Evelyn saw everything. She saw the bruises hidden under lace gloves. She heard the muffled cries through chapel doors. She counted the hours between punishments, the way the master's rage grew with every unanswered prayer. She learned the rhythm of cruelty, and she learned how to wait. The estate itself seemed to respond to her presence. Servants whispered that the air grew colder when she entered a room. Animals avoided her path. Once, a horse reared and broke its leg the moment she approached the stable. Some said she was cursed, others believed she was chosen, a vessel for the wrath of all who had died on that land without justice. That same year, strange events began. Tools went missing. The bell tower rang at odd hours, though no one pulled the rope. And every morning, the family awoke to find small piles of black feathers arranged on the porch, always in groups of 7. Thomas blamed the workers and punished them savagely, yet even after the beatings, the feathers returned. Local preachers warned that the land itself had turned unclean. They urged Thomas to cleanse his home through prayer and sacrifice. He held ceremonies in the barn, long secret gatherings that filled the night with chanting and smoke. But the next morning, the livestock were found dead, eyes open and staring toward the servant quarters. That was when the locals began to keep their distance. The Whitmore estate became a forbidden place. Children crossed themselves when they passed by. Travelers avoided the road that led to the orchard. The few who entered the property after sundown never stayed long enough to explain what they'd seen, though one man, a former soldier turned drifter, claimed to have heard singing beneath the ground. He left town the next day and was never seen again. The newspapers of the time made no mention of Evelyn, the Whitmores, or the strange happenings in that valley. But diaries, letters, and forgotten testimonies collected decades later paint a darker picture, one of a house steeped in guilt and a servant who began to understand that evil, when served too long, begins to look back at you. This was not just a household on the edge of ruin. It was a stage set for something ancient, something waiting, because in that place, in that year, the line between punishment and redemption vanished. And somewhere beneath the Whitmore estate, a secret was breathing. Evelyn was not like the others who had served in the Whitmore household before her. Her silence was not submission, it was survival. She had eyes that spoke where her mouth could not, eyes that measured cruelty and stored it like a blade. The family mistook her calmness for peace, but inside her chest burned a storm that had been gathering since the day she arrived. Every act of obedience was a mask. Every whispered, "Yes, ma, am," was a line drawn in the sand between what she endured and what she would one day avenge. The children adored her at first. Samuel, the eldest son, often followed her around the garden, asking about her home, her songs, her strange way of touching the soil before entering a doorway. Clara, the youngest, laughed when Evelyn braided her hair, humming old hymns that no one else in the house understood. Margaret Whitmore saw in Evelyn a strange grace, a woman who moved like a prayer. She often said, "If only the Lord had made her white, she'd have been a perfect lady." Evelyn would only bow her head, never answering, but her hands would tighten around the broom handle until her knuckles turned pale. Thomas Whitmore, however, saw something different. In her silence he sensed defiance. In her composure he saw power. He tested her like a child poking at a trapped animal. He invented chores that could never be completed, waited for mistakes that never came, and punished her for imagined slights just to watch her flinch. But she didn't. Not once. And that terrified him more than open rebellion ever could. Among the servants, Evelyn had few allies. Most avoided her, fearing that her calm drew the master's anger upon them. But there was one. Jonah, an older field hand who walked with a limp from a punishment delivered years before. Jonah had seen too much to believe in mercy. He often told her, "Don't let this house eat your soul." Evelyn never replied, but she listened. Jonah was the only one who noticed that she sometimes stood outside at night, barefoot in the cold, whispering into the wind as if speaking to the dead. And maybe she was. Her past was a mystery even to those who lived beside her. Some said she had watched her mother hanged for teaching scripture to other slaves. Others claimed she had once belonged to a preacher who branded his servants with verses instead of numbers. Whatever truth lay behind those rumors, It shaped the woman Evelyn became, someone who understood that pain could be power if you carried it long enough. The Whitmores' world was built on fear, but Evelyn learned to breathe within it. She memorized their routines, their arguments, their prayers. She knew the sound of Thomas's boots before he appeared. She knew the pattern of Margaret's sighs when she lied about forgiveness. She even knew which floorboards creaked outside the children's room and how long the house stayed silent after each punishment. The home itself became a map in her mind. Every locked door, every secret passage, every shadow that could one day become her ally. But there were moments when her mask cracked, when Clara, the little girl, would hand her a flower and say, "You're the nicest angel I know." Evelyn's throat would tighten. She would smile, but tears would tremble behind her eyes. The girl's kindness was a cruel reminder of everything she had lost: family, freedom, a future. And perhaps that was why she began to leave small gifts for Clara: a carved wooden bird, a polished stone, a ribbon she'd found in the attic, tokens of affection in a place where love was forbidden. Jonah noticed the change. He warned her one evening, "You start caring too much for their young, you'll forget why you're here." Evelyn looked at him then, really looked, and said softly, "I remember every reason." It was the first time anyone had heard her voice tremble. Meanwhile, the tension in the house thickened. Margaret had grown suspicious of her husband's late-night sermons. Samuel had begun to ask questions about the cries he heard beneath the floorboards. And Evelyn, patient, silent Evelyn, began to collect their words the way others collected coins. Every secret became a step towards something inevitable. The family saw her every day, yet never truly saw her at all. She was the shadow that swept their floors, the hands that prepared their meals, the figure that bowed at their table before disappearing into darkness. But the darkness was hers, and she was learning to use it. By midsummer, whispers had started among the workers that Evelyn was different, that she carried something unseen, not a curse but a calling. Jonah called it the fire of the forgotten. Others called it madness. But one night, when lightning split the sky and the earth trembled as if the desert itself had taken a breath, Evelyn stood at her window, eyes closed, whispering a single promise to the storm. It was not a prayer. It was the beginning. It began with a sound, soft, steady, impossible to place. A faint knocking that echoed through the house long after everyone had gone to bed. At first, Margaret thought it was the shutters rattling against the wind, but when she went to close them, the noise continued. 3 slow knocks followed by silence, then 3 more. Always the same rhythm, like a message meant for someone who could no longer answer. The next morning, Thomas blamed the servants. He stormed through the quarters, shouting, demanding to know who had been awake in the night. No one spoke. Evelyn stood among them, hands clasped, eyes down. She didn't flinch when his cane struck the table beside her, but as he turned away, she whispered something barely audible. 3 soft taps against the wooden bench, matching the rhythm from the night before. Jonah's head lifted. He recognized it too. That day the children found something strange near the well, a small bundle wrapped in linen tied with a red thread. Inside was a handful of dried lavender, a bird feather, and a tiny carved figurine, a woman's shape with no face. Clara ran to show her mother, proud of her discovery, but Margaret turned pale. She ordered the child never to go near the well again. When Thomas saw the object, his expression shifted from confusion to fear. He burned it immediately in the hearth, the smell of resin and ash spreading through the house like an invisible curse. That night, the knocking returned. Louder, closer. Evelyn was the only one who didn't seem afraid. She moved quietly through the halls barefoot, following the sound until it led her to the cellar door, the same door where she had once been locked for days without food. The metal latch trembled as if touched by unseen hands. When she opened it, a cold wind rushed past her, smelling of wet stone and rust. The darkness below was absolute. She lit a candle, stepped down and froze. Someone had written on the wall. At first, she thought it was soot or mold. But when the flame steadied, the words became clear, carved deep into the stone. She waits below. Her breath caught. The candle flickered violently as though the air itself had grown restless. Evelyn's heart pounded, but she didn't turn back. She reached out and touched the letters, feeling the grooves beneath her fingertips. They were fresh, too fresh. She didn't tell anyone what she'd found. The next day, Thomas ordered repairs on the cellar. He claimed he'd heard scratching noises coming from beneath the floor. He sent 2 workers down with shovels, but they came back pale, refusing to say what they'd seen. They quit the same night, walking away without their pay. Margaret told the neighbors it was superstition, but her voice shook when she said it. Evelyn began noticing other signs, doors left open that she had closed, ashes from burned letters reappearing in the fireplace, the faint smell of lavender drifting through rooms no one had entered. Once, while scrubbing the dining table, she noticed a dark stain forming beneath the wood polish. It looked like a handprint, small, childlike, and damp. At supper, Thomas prayed louder than usual. His voice trembled as he recited verses about repentance and deliverance. Evelyn stood behind him, her face calm but her pulse racing. She could feel something gathering in the air, something unseen but aware. The children grew quiet. Even the fire seemed to shrink away from the room. Later that night, Clara woke to find Evelyn standing beside her bed. The girl blinked sleepily and asked, "Is it morning already?" Evelyn smiled, her eyes soft but distant. "No, little one," she said. "Go back to sleep. It's just the wind knocking." Then she leaned closer, whispering something the child didn't understand. "Sometimes the wind remembers." When morning came, the cellar door was wide open. The workers' tools were scattered across the ground, and in the center of the floor lay a single object, a small wooden figurine. Identical to the one Thomas had burned days earlier, its head was missing. Jonah found Evelyn staring at it, expression unreadable. "What does it mean?" he asked. She turned to him slowly, eyes reflecting the dim light. "It means," she said, "that someone's still here." And though the desert sun blazed outside, the house seemed to grow colder with every word. From that day forward, the Whitmore estate sank into a quiet kind of madness. What had once been routine, the ringing of the bell for morning prayers, the clatter of breakfast, the hum of chores, became shadowed by tension. Every glance carried suspicion. Every word seemed to tremble under the weight of something unspoken. The family no longer looked at Evelyn with trust. They looked at her as if she were the echo of something they had tried to bury. Thomas grew erratic. His sermons became darker, obsessed with the idea of sin living among them. He preached not to God, but to the walls, warning of demons disguised as servants and temptations sent to test the faithful. The workers whispered that their master had begun sleeping with a pistol under his pillow. At night, he patrolled the halls, candle trembling in one hand, gun in the other. Sometimes he'd stop at Evelyn's door, staring at the wooden frame as if expecting it to breathe. The injustice of it all clung to her like smoke. She had done nothing. Not the disappearances, not the whispers, not the strange carvings in the cellar. Yet every cruelty that followed seemed drawn to her. Margaret, once her quiet defender, now refused to eat food Evelyn prepared. The children were kept away, their laughter replaced by nervous silence. When the youngest, Clara, began speaking of the woman in the well who sang to her at night, Thomas's fury turned to terror. He accused Evelyn of witchcraft. He dragged her before the servants, demanding she confess. Evelyn stood still, her wrists bound, her expression unreadable. He shouted scripture, slammed his cane against the floor, and demanded she admit to poisoning his home with the spirits of the damned. Evelyn said nothing. She looked at him, really looked, until his voice cracked. For a moment he faltered, seeing in her eyes not fear, but pity. That shook him more than any rebellion could. Jonah tried to intervene. "Master," he said softly, "she ain't the evil here." For his defiance, he was struck across the mouth. Blood spilled onto the wooden floor, dark and gleaming. Evelyn turned her gaze away, not because she couldn't bear it, but because she had already seen it too many times before. That night, Thomas locked her in the storage shed behind the orchard, the door sealed with a heavy chain. He told the others it was for the protection of the household, but everyone knew the truth. It was punishment, and perhaps something worse. The desert wind carried her cries through the fields. They said she didn't scream long. When Jonah brought her food the next morning, he found her sitting in silence, her wrists raw but her face serene. "You shouldn't keep fighting him," he whispered. "He'll kill you." Evelyn looked at him, eyes hollow but steady. "He already did," she said, "the day I came here." In the following days, the house began to unravel. Servants vanished in the night. Horses refused to approach the well. Margaret fell ill, muttering about shadows crawling beneath her bed. And Thomas, desperate to prove control, doubled down on his cruelty. He ordered the cellar sealed, the windows nailed shut, and the well covered with heavy boards. But none of it helped. The knocking returned, not from the walls this time, but from beneath the floors. Always the same rhythm. 3 slow taps, a pause, then 3 more. Margaret broke first. During supper, she shouted at Evelyn, accusing her of bringing damnation upon their home. "You've cursed us," she cried. "You've invited hell itself." Evelyn didn't respond. She only whispered, "Hell was already here." Thomas struck her, once, twice. The second blow broke her lip. She fell but did not cry out. Jonah stepped forward again, but Thomas turned the pistol on him. The room fell silent except for the sound of dripping blood. In that moment, Evelyn's eyes locked with Margaret's, and something unspoken passed between them. Not hatred, but truth. The mistress saw in her servant the reflection of her own captivity, the same pain wrapped in a different skin. When night came, a storm swept across the valley, fierce, blinding, relentless. Thunder shook the windows, lightning flashed over the orchard, and through the chaos, Evelyn vanished. No one saw her leave. The door of the shed hung open, chain broken clean in half. Some said the storm freed her. Others whispered that the house itself let her go. But by dawn, one thing was certain. The well, long covered and forgotten, was open again, and from its depths came the faintest sound of knocking, 3 times, slow and patient, waiting for someone to answer. The morning after the storm, the world around the Whitmore estate looked as though it had been struck by judgment itself. Trees lay twisted, the orchard flooded with red mud, and the well, once sealed shut with heavy boards, stood wide open, its mouth gaping like a wound. The cover had not blown away, it had been lifted, neatly placed aside. The chain that once bound it was missing, and beside the stones lay a trail of footprints, bare, small, and unmistakably human. They led toward the house, then stopped abruptly at the back steps, as if whoever made them had simply vanished into the air. Thomas ordered everyone inside. He nailed the doors shut, barred the windows, and declared that no one was to speak of what had happened. But fear, like rot, seeped through every nail, every prayer. The servants refused to go near the well. Even Jonah, who had seen too much to be easily shaken, crossed himself whenever he heard the faint echo of dripping water from below. The house, once ruled by routine, now existed in fragments of silence, broken only by whispers and the creak of the wood settling, though at times it didn't sound like the wood at all. Margaret's health worsened. She complained of waking each night to the sensation of someone standing beside her bed, cold hands brushing against her face. Once, she woke screaming that Evelyn was watching her from the corner of the room. But when Thomas struck a match to look, there was nothing there, only the Bible fallen open at the story of Lazarus, the one who returned from the grave. By the third day, the air inside the house felt heavier, as if the walls were slowly closing in. Thomas's prayers grew desperate, rambling. He ordered the servants to scrub the floors with salt water, convinced that the storm had carried evil into his home. But when Jonah lifted one of the carpets in the dining hall, he froze. Beneath it, carved into the wooden floor, was a symbol, an uneven circle of markings that looked burned rather than etched. In the center, something had been placed deliberately, a strand of black hair tied with a strip of red cloth. When Thomas saw it, he stumbled back. "She's cursed us," he whispered. "The slave brought the devil himself into my house." He demanded that the floor be burned, that every sign of her presence be erased. But as Jonah set the fire, a strange odor filled the air. Not wood smoke, but lavender, faint and sweet, the same scent that had lingered after the first figurine appeared. Margaret began to cry. "It's her," she said. "She's not gone." That night, the knocking returned again. Only now, it came from beneath the dining room, right where the symbol had been burned. 3 knocks, silence, then 3 more. The rhythm was perfect, patient, almost mocking. No one slept. Even Thomas, defiant in his fear, sat awake with his pistol on the table, flinching at every sound. Just before dawn, the sound changed. It was no longer knocking, it was dragging, something heavy scraping along the cellar floor. Then came a voice. Faint, cracked, female. It whispered only one word. "Below." Thomas lost what little reason he had left. He grabbed a lantern, opened the cellar door, and descended into the darkness, shouting curses into the shadows. The others listened from above, his words echoing, breaking apart, fading into silence. Minutes passed. Then came a scream, sharp and brief, followed by the sound of glass shattering. Jonah was the first to go down after him. What he found turned his face the color of ash. The lantern lay shattered, its flame extinguished by damp earth. The walls were covered in symbols, the same uneven circles, drawn not in charcoal this time, but in something darker, thicker. In the center of the floor, Thomas lay on his back, eyes wide, mouth open as if caught mid-prayer. Around his neck was a rusted chain, the same one that had locked Evelyn in the shed. He was alive, but barely. His pulse trembled like a dying candle. When Jonah lifted him, Thomas began to mutter over and over, "She's here, she's waiting below." By sunrise, he couldn't speak at all. His skin had turned cold, his eyes distant, unfocused. Margaret tried to pray over him, but her voice broke. The servants fled one by one, refusing to stay another night. Jonah lingered only long enough to whisper to Margaret, "The dead don't stay dead here." That evening, as the last light disappeared behind the canyon, Margaret heard the cellar door creak open again, slowly, on its own. The wind didn't move it. No one touched it. From the darkness came that same sweet smell of lavender and something else, something old, wet, and human. When she gathered the courage to look down, her candlelight caught a glimpse of movement at the bottom of the stairs, bare feet, pale against the dirt floor. And then a voice, soft and familiar, echoing upward. "Mrs. Whitmore," it said, "you forgot to say grace." The candle fell from her hand, and the flame went out. When morning came, the estate was silent, unnaturally so. The servants who had fled the night before never returned. The horses in the stable were found dead, their eyes wide open, their mouths full of mud, as if they had been forced to drink from the well. Thomas lay in bed, breathing but motionless, his skin pale as wax. Margaret sat beside him, her face hollow, whispering prayers that dissolved into tears. The house that once echoed with voices now held only the sound of the wind moving through broken shutters. Jonah came back just before noon. He had spent the night at the edge of the property, in the old chapel ruins. His hands trembled as he held something wrapped in burlap. It wasn't the storm, he told Margaret. It wasn't the devil either. It was her. He unwrapped the cloth. Inside lay a small wooden doll, hand-carved, roughly shaped like a woman. Around its neck hung a piece of the same chain that had been found on Thomas. Etched into the doll's chest was a single word: mercy. Margaret shuddered. Evelyn couldn't carve this. She's dead. Jonah shook his head slowly. Maybe she's more alive than any of us. Before Margaret could answer, a noise came from upstairs, a soft, steady tapping. She froze. It was the same rhythm as before. 3 taps, pause, 3 more. But it wasn't coming from below this time. It came from above, from the attic that hadn't been opened in years. Jonah gripped his crucifix and led the way up the narrow stairs. Dust hung thick in the air, swirling in the weak light that filtered through the cracks. The door to the attic was locked, but the wood around it was splintered, as though someone or something had tried to claw its way out. Jonah forced it open. Inside, the air was cold, unnaturally cold. Dozens of dolls sat lined along the shelves, all carved from the same rough wood. Each one was bound with a strip of red cloth. Each one had a word etched across its chest: silence, pain, fear, debt. All except one. The largest doll stood in the center of the room, on a small table beneath the window. Its word was justice. Margaret covered her mouth, trembling. She made these. Jonah stepped closer. Or someone did to remember her. But as he reached for the largest doll, the room seemed to shift. A low hum filled the air, rising into a whisper, so faint it was almost like breathing. Then the doll's head turned slightly toward him, the wood creaking. Its painted eyes gleamed in the dim light, wet and alive for a single heartbeat. Jonah stumbled back, dropping the crucifix. It landed at his feet, upside down. Margaret screamed and bolted for the stairs, but when she reached the door, it slammed shut in her face. From behind her came a voice, calm and soft, echoing through the dolls. You took her voice, it said. Now she will speak through yours. The attic filled with the sound of whispering, hundreds of tiny wooden mouths murmuring all at once. Jonah clawed at the door, praying, weeping, shouting Evelyn's name. Then the whispers stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. When the door finally gave way, only Margaret emerged. Her hair had turned completely white. Her eyes, once bright with terror, now looked empty, calm. She held the largest doll to her chest, like a child. She only wanted to be remembered, she said softly, and now she will be. Downstairs, Thomas stirred in his bed for the first time in days. He opened his eyes, gasping, and whispered the same word carved into the doll's chest: justice. Outside, the bell of the old chapel began to ring, though no one was there to pull the rope. In the days that followed, the mansion became a place of quiet dread. Jonah and Margaret spoke little, their eyes hollowed by sleepless nights and unspoken truths. Thomas recovered slowly, but his mind was fractured. He woke screaming at times, shouting Evelyn's name, his voice thick with terror and guilt. Servants refused to return. Even the nearby villagers began avoiding the road that led to the estate, claiming they could hear chains dragging across the dirt when the wind blew at night. Jonah began searching for answers. He ventured into the archives of Salt Lake City, determined to uncover any trace of Evelyn's past. What he found chilled him. No record of her purchase, no baptism, no burial. It was as if she had been erased from history the moment she died, but buried among the legal documents, he discovered something else, a ledger belonging to Thomas's father, dated 20 years earlier. Within its brittle pages were names, ages, and notes beside each entry. Next to Evelyn's name was written one short line: returned unpaid. Jonah didn't understand at first. He followed the trail to an old shipping manifest, and the truth struck him like a blow. Evelyn had not been born into the family's possession. She had been taken, sold once, then reclaimed when the debt was never settled. Her life had been a transaction, one that had never been properly closed. Back at the mansion, Margaret found Jonah in the library, the documents spread across the table like a puzzle. "You shouldn't have brought this here," she whispered. "She deserves the truth," Jonah replied. "You all do." Margaret hesitated. "You don't understand. There's more." She opened a drawer and pulled out a worn leather journal. This was Thomas's mother's diary. She wrote about Evelyn, how she wasn't meant to be a servant at all. Jonah frowned. "What do you mean?" Margaret turned to a specific page, the ink smeared by time and tears. "It says Evelyn was her half-sister, born of her father's violence, hidden, beaten, and given the name of a slave to erase the shame." The words seemed to drain the air from the room. Jonah stared at the faded writing, realizing that the cruelty Evelyn endured had not been born of mere hatred, but of blood, twisted, denied, and buried. As night fell, Jonah and Margaret heard the chapel bell again. It tolled once, then twice, then stopped. They went outside, the cold air biting their skin. The chapel door creaked open by itself. Inside, candles burned, though none had been lit. On the altar lay the wooden doll, the one marked Justice. But something was different. The chain around its neck was gone, and beneath it lay a new carving in the wood. 2 initials intertwined, E.M. Jonah's breath caught. "Evelyn Moore," he whispered, "her real name." Suddenly, memories began to align. Thomas's delirious ramblings, the whispers in the walls, the way the dolls always seemed to face east toward the old mine, the mine where the family had hidden its darkest secret. Evelyn had died there, buried beneath collapsing earth, while her master sealed the entrance to hide what he'd done. Margaret trembled. "She's not haunting us for vengeance. She's haunting us for truth." Jonah nodded slowly. "And she won't rest until the mine is opened." That night they dug through the cold Utah soil. The entrance was caved in, but as their shovels struck the frozen ground, the air grew thick with a metallic scent, blood and rust, memory and guilt. Beneath the dirt, they found a narrow wooden door, its hinges eaten by time. Etched into the surface, almost invisible, were the same words that had appeared on the doll. "Mercy lives." Jonah looked at Margaret. "Do you want to stop?" She shook her head. "No. If we end this now, we stay cursed." They pried open the door. The darkness inside seemed alive, pulsing. As Jonah stepped forward with a lantern, the flame flickered violently, then steadied, casting light on the walls. Dozens of chains hung there, broken, blackened by soot. In the center of the chamber was a single coffin made of rough wood. Its lid was carved with a symbol, a circle crossed by a line. Jonah ran his fingers across it. "This isn't just a grave," he said. "It's a seal." Margaret knelt beside it, tears glistening in her eyes. "Then we break it." But as she reached for the lid, a faint whisper rose from below, so close it seemed to brush against their ears. "You found me," it said. "Now tell them who I was." The lantern light flared, illuminating the coffin, and for an instant, carved into the inside of the lid, were faces, dozens of them, men, women, children, all the forgotten, all the unpaid. The moment Margaret and Jonah lifted the coffin lid, the air inside the chamber shifted, thick and electric. A cold wind swept through the narrow tunnel, extinguishing their lantern and leaving them in almost total darkness. Only the faint glow of phosphorescent mold on the stone walls provided enough light to see the shapes etched on the coffin lid. Dozens of faces, twisted in anguish, eyes open, mouths frozen mid-scream. Margaret's breath caught in her throat. She reached for Jonah's hand, but he wasn't there. The whispers rose again, louder this time, forming words that made her skin crawl. Justice. Mercy. Remember us. The voices seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, echoing off the walls, the ceiling, the soil itself. The ground trembled beneath her knees, as if the valley itself were responding to the uncovering of a secret long buried. She realized then that this chamber was more than a tomb. It was a ledger of pain, a collection of every wrong done by the Whitmore family over decades, and in the center, lying atop the coffin, was Evelyn's wooden doll marked Justice. Margaret lifted it, trembling. The eyes of the doll seemed almost human, gleaming in the faint light. The chain around its neck was now gone, replaced by a delicate ribbon, tied in a perfect bow. She felt a presence beside her, a warmth, almost comforting, almost human, and then she heard the unmistakable voice, soft but commanding. "You have found me, now remember me." Jonah's voice trembled from somewhere behind her. "It's her, Evelyn." Margaret looked at him, eyes wide. "But she's gone. She died in the mine." "Not entirely," Jonah said, pointing toward the coffin. "Her spirit, her essence, it's bound here with all those who were silenced. And now she can speak through us." The air thickened, and shadows in the chamber seemed to stretch, forming human shapes, phantoms of the forgotten. Margaret saw them clearly now. Slaves, servants, even children, all wronged, all left to die quietly, their lives erased. And in the center of them all, a figure moved with grace and authority. Evelyn. Her face pale but strong, eyes blazing, her presence undeniable. Margaret's knees gave out, and Jonah caught her as she fell. She endured everything, the voice whispered again. The lies, the beatings, the neglect, and yet she waited for someone to uncover the truth. Margaret understood then. Evelyn's cruelty as a servant, the strange carvings, the dolls, the whispers, the noises, they were all a testament, a record of injustice. Her evil had never been for its own sake. It was the method of exposing the sins of the Whitmore family. Every action, every shadow she cast had been a signal, a message to those who could see beyond fear. Jonah swallowed hard. She didn't just survive, she made them accountable. She became the judgment they deserved. The chamber shifted again, as if responding to his words. Dust rose in swirls, coalescing into shapes that mirrored the faces on the coffin lid. They stared at Margaret and Jonah, expectant. Evelyn's presence grew stronger, emanating from the doll as though it were alive. Then slowly she began to speak, not in words, but in images that filled their minds. The beatings she endured, the hidden tunnels beneath the estate, the well where she was imprisoned, the punishments inflicted upon those who tried to aid her, the secret ledger documenting the family's transgressions. Margaret's hands shook violently as she saw everything. The depth of the injustice, the horror of the family's cruelty, the lengths Evelyn had endured and planned for this moment. Her heart ached, not with fear, but with a profound sorrow and awe. She realized that Evelyn's evil was a mask, a necessity, a weapon sharpened by pain. And now, freed from the physical world, Evelyn demanded that history remember, that the truth never again be buried. Jonah whispered, voice choked, "She's giving us her story." The whispers shifted, almost pleading, "Tell them, show them, remember us." Margaret turned to the doll in her hands. The painted eyes gleamed with life. The chain around its neck, gone for the first time, was now replaced by an intricate symbol, a circle crossed by a line, carved deep into the wood. She understood. This symbol was not just a signature, it was a seal of truth, Evelyn's truth. And through it, the stories of all those who had suffered, All those who had been erased would live on. Outside, the chapel bell began to ring, unbidden, its deep tolling echoing across the valley. It was not the sound of a clock or a person pulling the rope. It was a declaration, a mark of justice long denied. The villagers, hearing the bell, knew instinctively that the Whitmore estate had changed, that the reckoning long whispered about was finally unfolding. Margaret sank to her knees beside the coffin, tears streaming. "We'll remember. I promise you, we'll tell your story." And then, from the shadows, the figure of Evelyn seemed to fade, leaving only a sense of presence behind, warm, fierce, unyielding. The dolls along the shelves shifted slightly, their painted faces glowing faintly. Each represented a voice no longer silent, a story no longer hidden. Jonah finally spoke. She didn't just seek revenge. She sought balance. She became the justice her masters refused to give. Margaret nodded, clutching the doll tightly. She realized then that the estate itself had become a monument to memory, a record of suffering and the power of one woman who endured enough to make the world acknowledge her truth. And in that instant, the full weight of the revelation hit her. Evelyn's cruelty, her patience, her haunting. All had been a deliberate act, a methodical unearthing of injustice so profound that it could never again be ignored. The mine, the dolls, the chains, the whispers, they were all pieces of a single narrative, the story of Evelyn Moore, the slave whose suffering forged a reckoning that even death could not silence. And as the sun rose over the valley, casting light on the broken estate, Margaret and Jonah understood that history had shifted. The evil they had feared was never in Evelyn. It was in those who sought to hide the truth. And now, the truth had won. The events at the Whitmore estate left an imprint far deeper than anyone could have imagined. Margaret and Jonah, once skeptical and fearful, now carried the weight of Evelyn's story in every heartbeat, every glance at the barren orchard, every echo of the chapel bell. The dolls, the carvings, the whispered messages, they were no longer objects of superstition or fear. They were testament, each item a fragment of memory, each whisper a plea for remembrance, each shadow a reflection of lives erased by cruelty. Margaret found herself haunted not by Evelyn's presence, but by the reality of her own family's complicity in a system built on suffering. She understood now that history was not merely a record of events, but a tapestry of pain, endurance, and moral choice. The Whitmore family had believed they could bury injustice along with the bodies in the mine. But Evelyn's return, her careful orchestration of memory, proved otherwise. The oppressed, though silenced, carry their stories beyond death, demanding acknowledgement and justice. Jonah, too, was forever changed. He had witnessed the living consequences of cruelty masked as obedience, the hidden chains that persisted long after the war ended. He realized that the law, the titles, the records of society could not account for the human soul. No ledger, no document could capture the depth of suffering, the quiet heroism of someone forced to survive under unimaginable oppression. Evelyn had endured the unendurable, turning her pain into a reckoning that transcended fear and demanded truth. The villagers who had once whispered about the Whitmore estate now shared a different story, one tinged with reverence rather than terror. Children were taught quietly about the courage of a woman whose suffering became a voice for the forgotten. Travelers who passed the valley felt the weight of history pressing on them, sensing that the land itself had borne witness to injustice and now demanded reflection. The wind carried more than dust. It carried memory. Margaret often returned to the dolls, arranging them carefully, recognizing that they were more than symbols, they were guardians of history. Each word etched into their wooden forms, justice, mercy, silence, pain, was a reminder of what had been endured and what had been reclaimed. They told her that cruelty left its mark, but so did resilience. that those who suffered did not vanish into oblivion. They left trails, signs, whispers, and sometimes, like Evelyn, a power that would endure beyond flesh. In quiet moments, Margaret would walk the halls of the estate, imagining the steps of those who had lived and died there. She understood that human cruelty could never erase memory entirely, and that the moral weight of injustice persists until it is confronted, acknowledged, and shared. Evelyn had shown her that vengeance was not merely punishment, it was remembrance, a form of justice that history itself could no longer ignore. And so, the estate became a classroom of conscience. Margaret and Jonah became chroniclers, telling the story of Evelyn Moore to anyone who would listen. Their words reminded listeners that history is not neutral. It is shaped by those who wield power and those who survive its abuse. They urged reflection, empathy, and recognition of those who suffered in silence, whose stories demand to be heard before the world moves on. The emotional resonance of Evelyn's journey was inescapable. It was a reminder that suffering endured in secrecy cannot remain hidden forever, and that the smallest acts of observation, remembrance, and acknowledgement carry the potential to confront centuries of injustice. It was a lesson in courage, in the endurance of the human spirit, and in the subtle yet inexorable power of truth. Margaret often whispered her own vow in the empty rooms, to preserve the memory of those silenced, to honor the lives that had been erased, and to ensure that the world never forgot that darkness may linger, but it is illuminated by those brave enough to confront it. Evelyn's story was no longer hers alone. It belonged to everyone who bore witness, and to the generations yet to come. The Whitmore estate stood still, bathed in the orange glow of sunsets over the Utah Valley. Shadows stretched across the orchard, over the well, across the corridors once filled with fear. But for the first time, the estate felt alive with memory, with acknowledgement, with the quiet triumph of truth. Evelyn had turned pain into justice, silence into voice, and death into revelation. And through that, the world remembered. If you've stayed with us until this moment, you've seen more than just a story. You've witnessed a life erased, a truth hidden, and a reckoning that could not be ignored. Evelyn Moore's tale is not only a chilling reminder of cruelty endured, but also a call for reflection on the injustices that history often tries to bury. Every carving, every whisper, every shadow in that estate was a message meant to reach those who were willing to see beyond fear and silence. Now, we turn to you, the witness of this revelation. What do you think Evelyn wanted most when she returned in spirit? Was it revenge, justice, or simply acknowledgement of the wrongs that could never be erased? Type your thoughts below. Let the world know what resonates with you. Your perspective matters because stories like this demand engagement, not silence. And if the tale of Evelyn Moore stirred something within you, if it made you question the histories we are told and those we are not, there's more waiting to be uncovered. Our channel dives into the darkest corners of history, revealing the hidden stories of injustice, vengeance, and the secrets of lives forgotten. By subscribing and hitting the notification bell, you join a community committed to uncovering the truths that others wish remained buried. Share this story with others who crave the unseen, the untold, the shadows that shape history. Every comment, every discussion helps keep the memory alive, not just of Evelyn, but of countless others who endured in silence. If you feel compelled to act, type "I remember" below to show that you stand witness to what history tried to erase. And remember, the stories of the past are more than tales. They are lessons, warnings, and a call to never ignore injustice again. Subscribe now, stay with us, and be ready for the next hidden story, waiting to emerge from the shadows. The voices of the forgotten are patient, but they demand to be heard, and together we can ensure they are never silent again. As the sun dipped below the jagged horizon of Utah, casting long shadows across the Whitmore estate, A strange stillness settled over the land. The dolls sat quietly on their shelves, each one a guardian of memory, each one a testament to lives once silenced. Margaret and Jonah walked through the halls in silence, the weight of Evelyn Moore's story pressing upon them, but also a strange sense of closure settling into their bones. The estate, once a place of cruelty and fear, now pulsed with memory, a silent monument to resilience, justice, and the truths that refused to be buried. Yet even in that quiet, there was a lingering presence. The wind whispered through broken shutters, carrying faint traces of lavender and the echo of taps that had once haunted the night. It was a reminder that the past never truly leaves us. Evelyn's spirit, her pain, her justice, it remained, woven into the very stones and timber of the estate. Margaret could feel it in the chill that brushed her neck, in the soft creaking of the floorboards, and in the weight of the wooden doll she carried like a talisman. Jonah looked toward the valley, where the chapel bell still tolled unbidden, its deep resonance vibrating through the soil, the trees, and the hearts of those who dared to listen. He understood then that their journey was far from over. Evelyn had revealed the truth of her life, and the lives erased alongside her, but the valley held other secrets, other injustices waiting to be uncovered. The whispers in the wind hinted at more names, more stories, more souls who had been silenced and forgotten, waiting for someone brave enough to remember. Margaret knelt beside the well, her fingers tracing the stone rim, the same place where so many horrors had begun. She felt the pull of history beneath her fingertips, the layers of suffering, courage, and survival that had been hidden from sight. She whispered a promise aloud, to continue seeking, to continue remembering, and to ensure that the voices of the forgotten would never again be silenced. The valley had tested them, shaken them, and revealed them to themselves, and in return it demanded vigilance, empathy, and courage. The dolls seemed to watch her, their painted eyes gleaming faintly in the twilight. "Justice is never finished," she murmured, almost to herself, but the words seemed to resonate in the still air, as if the valley itself acknowledged her vow. Every shadow, every whisper, every chill in the air was a reminder that Evelyn's story was not unique. There were countless others, buried in history, whose voices would only be heard if someone dared to uncover them. Jonah placed a hand on Margaret's shoulder. "We've only begun," he said softly, "and when the next story finds us, we'll be ready." As darkness enveloped the valley, the wind carried with it the faintest echo of 3 slow knocks, an unfinished rhythm, a signal that the past was never truly gone. Somewhere in the shadows beyond the orchard, the next secret waited, patient and unyielding. It was a story that would demand courage, scrutiny, and a willingness to confront truths most would rather ignore. Margaret and Jonah exchanged a silent glance, understanding the weight of what lay ahead. They had witnessed the reckoning of one forgotten life, and they knew that more awaited them, hidden in the shadows of history, whispered through time, and locked behind doors long sealed. The valley was silent now, but only for a moment. Somewhere in the darkness another story stirred, waiting for its voice, waiting for witnesses, waiting for justice to be remembered. And as they prepared to leave the estate, the promise lingered in the air. History is never finished, and the next mystery was already awakening. The dolls watched, the wind carried their secrets, and the valley waited. For those willing to listen, the stories would speak, and Margaret and Jonah, guardians of memory, were ready to hear them.